Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the Atlantic Treaty Association. Thank you for the generous introduction. It's always great to be among friends. If we talk about the image of NATO, I think with Dr. Ebtesam, 10 years ago, we started working on this in the Gulf states, and we're still working, I would say, because this is an important component. And the work that the ATA has always promoted, which is to promote a better understanding of NATO's aims and objectives with different countries. It began when we were, as you say, a little bit younger, in the late 80s, when we were working with the countries of NATO in a total different environment. Some are talking of a return of the Cold War. I don't believe that that is the case, but certainly we started working there. In NATO, I was not a relic of the Cold War because I began in 1991. When the new strategic concept in Rome was approved, it was made public. This is the new strategic concept, the first of the three, which since the beginning, I would say 1991, 1999, and 2010, has progressively given more role in NATO to the Mediterranean region. I was asked to talk in a session which is talking about the non-military instability factors. And I think it's very important, if I can complement, and again, I apologize because I was late, so I couldn't hear. It's always difficult when you go into a place, you don't know what the others have spoken about. But to complement what I just heard from the Gulf dimension and also eastward, I would say that if we look at the Middle East, we talk about Middle East and North Africa today, but we forget that this is not one region. In fact, it is the interaction of a number of regions. It is the Maghreb, it is the Mashrak, it's the Arab Gulf, it's the Persian Gulf. And if we look at it in a more continuity, geographical continuity, with challenges and threats which have become increasingly transnational, it also links up to the Balkans, which can be considered as also part of NATO South. In fact, it was the NATO command in the south, in Naples, which ran 2 operations, with the end of the Cold War in Bosnia and Kosovo. And so they were part of, if you want, of an area of instability and insecurity, which spreads from the Balkans up to the Middle East. And what we look today in terms of domestic factors and transnational challenges, I would argue is nothing new. I know that there's a lot of emphasis today on the conflicts in the Middle East, but one forgets that started in 1946 with the first Iranian crisis. We have had 67 conflicts until present in the Middle East. So I would say the conflict instability, at least, is nothing new. And when we look at domestic drivers of change, unemployment, low economic growth, high level of inflation, a growing younger population which cannot find jobs, it cannot find opportunities to build a family, to go to the university, to have a decent life, then you explain why the Arab revolutions, which I don't like to call the Arab Spring, I call it more the Arab public awakening, maybe because I'm deformed for the work we've done with the public, but it was the public which revolted against regimes which had broken the social contract between the rulers and the ruled ones. And we should ask ourselves why there was no Arab revolution in the Gulf, for example. And this is yet another difference that we can immediately identify, because the socioeconomic developments are different. Today we have common transnational security challenges and threats. They are common to the Arab people, they're common to Israel, they're common to NATO, they're common, therefore, to the United States, European countries, and Canada. But these trends that we look today, I would argue, are nothing new. In fact, what is happening in North Africa, and to a certain extent, therefore in the area which goes from Maghreb to the Mashrak, is something that was supposed to happen. Now, I would have never foreseen when this would have happened. For example, I would have never thought that in my lifetime I would have seen the images of Mubarak teared down by the population. But we knew that that this kind of socioeconomic imbalances, to address the part of your session of today which looks at domestic, couldn't be sustained. It's unsustainable. I would even argue that we could have new revolutions in this region if the social, economic disparities in this region are not addressed. Why are people fleeing to more prosperous areas. The demographic trends that we see today, we have seen them first within Arab countries, within the same societies, from rural to more urban areas, where people were looking first inside North Africa to better opportunities. And when they didn't find them, what are they fleeing from? They're fleeing from poverty, they're fleeing from conflict. So if we don't address those root causes, because we all like to talk about root causes, and I don't want to talk about root causes so much about terrorism, because terrorism is, in fact, in terms of analysis, different other causes. But the root causes are the injustice, is the socioeconomic, are the fact that domestic security and international security, the dividing lines between these two borders are now blurred. And that's why we have transnational security challenges, which are common to NATO countries and to our partners in the region, we've engaged for 20 years. Because we should not forget that we had the Mediterranean dialogue for 20 years. We've had the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative for 10 years now, so which is a lot of time. And therefore, we need to look at the socioeconomic imbalances, otherwise there will be other revolutions. Because when people will not find what we're looking for, and when they ask their leaders to provide, in terms of human dignity, in terms of democracy, individual liberty, the rule of law, which are the values which underpin the NATO alliance, well, maybe it will not be enough for them. And somewhat, these kind of revolutions have been contained, because except the violence that these revolutions have registered in Libya, when the regime turned against its own people, in Syria, when the regime turns against its people, in other countries, like Tunisia, for example, in other countries like Morocco, Jordan, which still today is an island of stability in a turbulent sea, which the Middle East is, they have found a response from the leaders, and the political class have brought together and then trying to resist. And so I will go to the Mediterranean dialogue, which is a way in which we've engaged these countries for 20 years, and to the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, with the differences that there are. This is a tailored approach which respects the specificity of different countries. You know, Algeria is not Jordan, Tunisia is not Morocco. I would say Jordan is not Saudi Arabia. You know, and therefore, you need to look at this at each country in its own specific terms. And that's why NATO has individualized the cooperation since the beginning. We tried to develop an approach by listening to our partners. For many years, you know, the West was accused of not listening, of imposing a model. Well, what we try to do in NATO for 20 years with the countries in the region was to listen, to have a two-way street, to develop joint ownership. And that's the reason why, regardless of the revolutions, none of these countries have walked out from the Mediterranean dialogue. Today you have Tunisia, which still wants more cooperation. You got the Prime Minister of Tunisia, you got the Prime Minister of Morocco. You have all of these countries. What are they looking for in NATO? Well, they're looking, I would say, what's the added value of NATO with regard to other international organizations, and also with regard to national responses. Well, it's security, but it's the O in NATO. What's the added value? When they ask me, what is it for Saudi Arabia, what it can be for Jordan, in addition to what they have with the United States, with the United Kingdom, with other European countries, is the O. NATO is an organization in which all this cooperation that we've put together that has allowed to internationalize security in a multilateral and cooperative approach to security multiplies the effect for everybody. Thanks to this cooperation, each country can achieve much more than it would ever been able to achieve alone, in concert, in cooperation with the others. And that's the added value. That's the O in NATO. And today, this is more relevant, of course. But I would not want to reduce the cooperation of NATO in the political and in the practical sphere, because all we've been doing with our partners in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East is based on twin pillars of political dialogue, increased political consultations, and practical individualized cooperation. I wouldn't like to reduce it only to the fight on terrorism. Of course, we put it there. In 2004, when we enhanced the Mediterranean dialogue in a considerable way, and when we launched the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, already there, fighting terrorism through border security, intelligence sharing, participation to Operation Active Endeavor of the partners who wanted training training military forces to promote interoperability so that the countries of NATO and the countries of our partners could work together to manage successfully crises should they occur. But what have we done with them? Well, we built a new culture of cooperation. It was unthinkable when we were working many years ago that you remember. There's more than 20, I must say. It's more than 20. At the time, it was unthinkable for a NATO Secretary General to travel to the Middle East. And yet, we brought, and together also, 6 times the NATO Council to Gulf states. We brought it to Jordan last December. The whole NATO Council went to Jordan under the auspices of the King, and we celebrated the 20 years of our cooperation. Nobody would have thought that you would put around the table Arabs, Europeans, North Americans, and Israel on one framework, and Gulf states on the other side of this framework. So the achievement, in my view, is the fact that countries talk to each other, is the fact that countries understand each other's understanding of NATO in the region, because of course we want to promote, but also understanding of the region within NATO. So important to listen and to put it in a context. But then we've also operationalized this, because in Bosnia, we had several Mediterranean dialogue countries working into the NATO operation, which was under UN mandate, Operation I4 and S4. We have had Arab countries together with NATO in Kosovo. We've had Arab countries in Afghanistan with us, and in Libya, which you can criticize as much, some, I would say, can criticize as much as they want, but it was something that was a response of the whole international community and which brought together Arab countries, because it was demanded by the foreign ministers of the Arab League. It had 2 UN Security Council resolutions. It brought 4 Arab countries around the table like this one, together with the 28 members of the alliance, to shape the strategy and objective of this operation. And actually, our partners in the region have not only been security users, but actually have contributed to security, sending their troops in Bosnia, sending them in Kosovo, in Afghanistan, and putting their airplanes on the air in Libya. Now, I will try to stop to say that, again, terrorism, and I heard what Dr. Abdesam said before, it's one of the major challenges we have today. But we shouldn't look at that only. We have to look at the fact that being around the table, we continue with this difficult, sometimes, exercise, which is to promote more dialogue, to promote understanding. Because if it is true that NATO and its partners share common security challenges and threats today, represented by conflict spillover, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and yet terrorism, we should not forget that we also share the same aspirations for peace, for security, for a world which is safer for us and for our partners in the region. I'll stop here.